I think there's a realm in which the term rizz can be adapted into something meaningful artistically. It's a word that already carries layers of cultural energy, right? When translated into music, it could be used to say something really profound about performance or even just identity. Similar to how Stacey used the term GPT to make a narrative about communication and emotional distance in the era of technology, right? I think the word rizz has the same kind of potential here. I actually love when pop music does this, when it reflects what's happening in broader pop culture and reinterprets it into a unique narrative. But more often than not, these buzzwords get invoked at a corporate level in very uninspired ways throughout the production pipeline. They're dropped into lyrics as quick, I guess, signifiers of relevance, with no effort to unpack the emotion or story that made the term meaningful in the first place. Quote, "Yeah, I got that rizz," for instance, accomplishes very little in the grand scheme of things. It's not that a line like this can't work. Posturing songs are a staple in pop music, but the challenge these days is that almost everyone's posturing. The market is so oversaturated with confidence anthems, so I think in order to stand out, the posture itself needs to carry some kind of unique character to it. I like the song, but I think this is part of what stings a little bit with rizz. I think there's something more that could have worked here. In the words of Kai Cenat, who is largely credited with bringing the term to social media to be consumed by the masses, rizz chronicles an underdog story of sorts. When things aren't going your way, especially in a romantic pursuit, rizz becomes the last card that you play. It's charisma, right? It's the comeback of someone trying to reshape how they're perceived in the eyes of another. Rizz then, in essence, is what you use to arrive at this moment of saving grace. That instant when the love interest sees another side of you and decides to give you another chance. There's something tender underneath the meme of rizz, right? It's the art of the pivot, the small miracle of being seen in a different way, and also the acknowledgement that you care a lot about how you're perceived by others. It's a lot more nuanced than I think people give it credit for. But this is why I could see a lot of applications of this concept for XLOV as a group. They're in this interesting position. They're underappreciated yet increasingly often overhated, despite the loud hounding for something new in K-pop. You know, people say they want innovation, but when a group like XLOV appears, pushing towards something new, they're often met with skepticism and dismissal. So I think the rizz concept could have been a brilliant meta-narrative, a way for them to reclaim their confidence as their own kind of underdog weapon. It's what makes the song a little frustrating to consume. The concept of rizz has emotional and cultural richness more than I think people give it credit for, but the execution here feels like it only skimmed the surface. I want more here. There's a story here in the rizz, one about resilience and about charisma as a form of self-redemption. XLOV as a group brings something conceptually so grand, but I would say the music is struggling to keep up with their potential. It's just too simple for them, in my opinion. Musically, I think Rizz's problem isn't inherently repetition, but instead the lack of dynamic or the lack of modulation. We exist in a society, a bare-bones production society at the moment, and so there aren't many features to an instrumental like Rizz that can save itself from being perceived as monotonous. Beep, a B-side on the album, does incorporate modulation in its repetitive choruses. What's modulated here is very brief, a subtle lift in the pre-chorus harmony and a kind of variation in rhythmic phrasing during the hooks, but those small changes in structure go a long way to establishing memorable melodies. I feel more inclined to return to this song compared to the title track as a result of that. There's just more, I guess, breathing room, more movement in the instrumental, even if it's still modest. And as I started this video with, there's also the issue of song meaning. I don't think Rizz presents a strong enough narrative. I can compare this song to Igloo by Kiss of Life, which I know we don't talk about Bruno, we don't talk about Kiss of Life, but Igloo is also a posturing song that takes its unseriousness very seriously. The central premise, quote, "I can melt an igloo because I'm so dang hot," is ridiculous, but it's unique and importantly, delivered with conviction. The whole track is structured to serve that confidence. Exaggerated vocal inflections, very crisp percussive accents, and a production that lets its own silence punctuate the essence of melting an igloo because you're so dang hot. It doesn't take much, very little effort on your behalf. The result is a song that feels self-aware yet unapologetically bold, and that's what makes it memorable to me. Rizz, on the other hand, feels like it wants to project that same cheeky self-assuredness, but the instrumental and the narrative doesn't quite rise to meet it. Production-wise, Rizz leans heavily on a minimal rhythmic loop, a tight trap pop beat with clean 808s, punctuated by percussive vocal chops that are meant to carry the attitude. It's sleek, but it doesn't quite evolve. There's just a lack of something, of a harmonic layering or a dynamic lift somewhere in the song, so once the main groove settles in, it never really goes anywhere. And that's fine if your top-line melody or vocal performance carries strong enough variation, but I think here, the top line just cycles through the same rhythmic phrasing with minor ad-lib changes. The result is, on first impression, a song that starts to feel static by the second chorus, like it's trapped inside its own loop. I get the sense that the repetition is supposed to invoke hypnosis, like you're falling under the spell of the rizz-ness. I don't know. I don't think it works for me on first impression. I find myself wanting more. and I do find something more when looking at the rest of the album. Comparing it with Drip Drip, the final song in the album, I can feel the difference almost immediately. One thing about XLOV, they're gonna repeat the song title over and over again to any extent. Drip Drip uses very brief repetition of the song title in the chorus, but it leans back on melodic progression to keep things interesting and moving. There's a greater sense of motion here, a subtle chord change beneath the second chorus, another syncopated percussive switch that does a lot more to capture your attention. And there are some nicely stacked harmonies all throughout that give the hooks more punch. Again, these are small production choices in the grand scheme of the song, but they make Drip Drip feel dynamic, something that I think Rizz needs a little more of on first listen. But despite my clamorings about sociolinguistics, I do really appreciate this album entirely. It's an explorative mini-album, leaning hard into texture, emotion, and this interplay between vulnerability and power. Each track carries such a distinct character, forming a narrative arc that feels deliberate, well thought out, especially for a group that is still rounding out their debut year. The opening track, Scent, sets the tone so nicely. It's namely about the balance between restraint and release. The song opens with a very subdued, I guess, spectral synth pad very up in the air before a warm bass line comes in to ground the mix. XLOV's vocals float at the center here, very intimate, guiding us through a soundscape that evolves with the confidence necessary for the following track, Rizz. It's minimalist but immersive, a difficult balance to strike in the modern day K-pop marketplace, and yet XLOV handles it with such control already. As the album progresses, XLOV experiments more and more freely with rhythm, mood, and vocal phrasing, but I think it's the closing track, Drip Drip, that ties everything together for me. It's built around a grounded, meditative guitar line. The song discusses narratively and also musically that same kind of emotional restraint here. This song reminds me a lot of LE SSERAFIM's Burn the Bridge, that same kind of cinematic quality in the guitar line where it feels like everything is possible and the whole world is yours to grasp. As a whole, this album feels like a promise of what is to come, that XLOV's creative horizons are still very much expanding. Yeah, my verdict is that XLOV are making all the right moves at the moment despite everything, my personal qualms. I do think their songs, in their often simpleness, pale in comparison to the billowing potential of this group conceptually, but this is genuinely only the beginning. It's still their debut year. Starting off with palatable enough music is a smart decision, especially for a group that is still solidifying their identity. I guess it's just that we're unfortunately in an era of pop production where things have become so stripped back that a slight misstep, one underwritten hook, or one unchanging beat can make a track lose its spark almost immediately. Rizz as a song hinges on, at most, I would say maybe 2 strong hook sections. If neither of those capture the listener, it's unfortunately going to feel very boring. That's not XLOV's fault. They're certainly bringing the energy. They're bringing the Rizz in question. It's just a result of the production environment they're operating in. Yeah, it's a wish I continue to have since tuning into their debut. I'm looking for as much ambition in the music as we see in the concept. I think when XLOV eventually finds a sound that matches the scale of what they're visually and thematically aiming for, that is when they'll become unstoppable. XLOV world domination, you could say. But until then, I'm still having a great time. I think my favorite song on the album is Beep, but Drip Drip is a close second. Also, Scent. Yeah. Very excellent music to be found on this album. I highly recommend it, regardless of my petty qualms with the semantics of the word Rizz. Thank you for watching this. If you did, let me know what you think about this release. Do you agree or disagree about narrative Rizz and modulation? Do you think the song succeeds, and if so, why? Yes. Thanks again for watching. Subscribe if you want to, and I will see you next time.